All right. Welcome, everyone, to today's demo. Really excited to talk about PEI Blue Mussels today here at the Meyer Demo Kitchen at the Founders Food Hall and Market. Obviously, a big thanks to the folks at Canada's Food Island for reaching out to myself and asking me to put on kind of a festive holiday demo for the season that we're in right now with the holiday season upon us. So today, we are going to do kind of a little bit of a new take, but in a lot of ways it's actually a very old take on some PEI shellfish mussels. Now, one thing that all of us islanders know, and anyone that is a fan of the shellfish that do come from Canada's Food Island, they're very healthy, right? Grown in very healthy waters, great source of protein, very good option for dining as well as eating at home. And the other thing too, which is becoming super important nowadays, is they're very affordable to purchase as well. Our mussels that are grown around PEI actually thrive in cooler waters. So around this time of year, as we are just getting through fall and into December, the mussels are actually at some of the peak quality that they can be. And that again is from those cool waters. Mussels are filter feeders, so they need the added nutrients. They need a solid base of salinity to thrive, but they also need a steady temperature in the environment that they live in to ensure that they're able to kind of consistently grow. Mussels almost eat consistently during the day because they're a bivalve feeder, so they filter water in with sediment and nutrients in through one of their valves and then out through the other. They kind of expel that water. So it's important to have not only a consistent food source, but also a consistent temperature, which this time of year with the cooler weather upon us, we absolutely have that. So today, to accent island mussels, what we are going to have and feature in both the two recipes that we're going to be talking about is something that everyone has the luxury of being able to attain in some way, shape, or form, and that is, believe it or not, PEI Island pine. So, as we know, foraging is becoming kind of something that's very much coming back into vogue. You're seeing a lot of people, home cooks and people that are interested in kind of the culinary scene here in the province, reconnecting with their culinary roots and with some of these ingredients. And one thing I kind of felt obligated today to touch on, to get away from kind of our more traditional offerings around Christmas time that we know and love, is to kind of reconnect not only with our heritage and our roots here in the province, but with some of those historical cooking ingredients. You hear, lots of time nowadays people going out and foraging for spruce tips, maybe for mushrooms, but the reality is there is a great food source here that's available in the province, island-wide, at different times of year. So depending in the time of year that we're in, the months that you're completing a recipe, there's probably something in your backyard or in somewhere that's naturally available to yourself that you can find these products, right? So pine was actually something once upon a time that was cooked with very, very often. It was readily available. It was a way to impart flavor. But you have to kind of know what you're looking for, right? So as we get a little bit deeper into the recipes, we're going to circle back into how we prepare this kind of, I'll say, unique ingredient. But again, the idea of this recipe, or these recipes today rather, is reconnecting to kind of our culinary roots here in the province. And that often is connecting with those products and ingredients that are available throughout the different times of year, and then kind of shining a spotlight and discussing how we can accentuate those wild products that we do have here in the province. So, to get started with our first PEI Blue Mussel recipe today, we're going to do a very simple recipe. It's going to be a bacon, maple, and spruce mussels accented with some local beer. Very natural flavor. So I'm very lucky to have Chef Raina with me assisting today. So I'm going to ask Chef Raina, if she doesn't mind, she's just going to saute off the bacon and start to expel some of that fat, and she can kind of babysit that over a little bit of heat and ensure that we're going to get some caramelization. As we know, caramelization means flavor. Flavor is very much what we're looking for today. This bacon in this recipe is going to not only add a fatty component, but it's going to add a smoky element. It's going to add a richness that's really going to cut through the salinity base of the shellfish that we associate with mussels. Again, talking about that environment they grow up in, the food source is constant, that temperature base is constant, but also the salinity base around our shellfish here give them that beautiful salty accentuation and flavor profile. So as Chef Raina goes ahead and puts that bacon in the pan to get it crisped up, we're very much just going to start to render that product down. Nothing different than you wouldn't do in, say, bacon bits, but just starting that cooking process and expelling some of that fat. In a lot of recipes, we may remove the fat altogether, but the reality in this recipe is that's only going to add flavor. It's going to accentuate that balance between kind of salty and fatty, and then we're going to talk about some of the other deeper elements of this flavor profile and some of the acidity. Okay, so another thing we're going to do to get this mussel recipe prepared is add a little bit of flavoring components directly to the mussels. Once we add in the warm bacon and add in our liquid, which in this case is our craft beer, then we are going to kind of have all that flavor profile steamed together, and those different products meld to form one uniform taste. So the first thing I'm going to add is a little bit of fresh dill. This is going to assist in our main flavor profile of the pine become a little less harsh, right? As you know, a lot of times if you were to eat raw pine or you were to taste some of the sap, it's very, very flavor forward and pungent. So this is going to be a way to kind of balance that. It's no different than using, say, something as simple as garlic. We know that garlic is spicy. If you're using a lot of it, there's probably some sweet element, maybe a sugar-based item, some type of simple syrup maybe, that's going to be used in utilization in combination with these ingredients to kind of meld that out. So we're doing that exact same sort of ideal today with adding a couple different herbs. So to start, I'm going to take my dill, and instead of chopping it on the board, which for a lot of recipes is necessary, I'm actually just going to tear it with my hands, because what happens when you chop on the board is you're forcing out a lot of the oil and the moisture from the product, and that's where the flavor is. Again, because I'm only trying to impart the flavor of dill, I'm not so much trying to evenly disperse this herb through the mussels. It gives me another great reason to utilize the entire product. I'm going to actually throw the stems in there as well. So I'm simply going to start at the top where my dill florets are, give a quick little tear, ensure that I'm almost pinching with my thumb and forefinger to activate some of those essential oils that are present in the surface of these herbs. And then when I get down to the stems, I'm going to make sure that I'm tearing basically as close together as I can so that they can be evenly dispersed throughout the shellfish. Okay? Next, to balance a lot of these deep flavor profiles that we have, we're going to need a little bit of sweetness. So naturally, we're using a lot of island ingredients. We're using a lot of things that sort of you can find naturally either in your backyard or hopefully in your home fridge and pantry. So I'm simply going to add some Canadian maple syrup. I'm going to add probably about 2 to 3 tablespoons total, and that'll be enough to accent the actual flavor profile that we do have on the shellfish itself. We don't want it to be sweet to the touch. The sweet shouldn't be the leading flavor, but it's going to blend nicely with our beer and our bacon that we are adding first, and then of course our island pine. So next thing we're going to do, again, to just kind of a balanced flavor profile, build a little bit more depth in there, simply some powdered ginger. We could use fresh ginger, absolutely, if we were going to do that step, and actually our next recipe has some actual ginger in it that isn't of the powdered variety that's fresh. This just gives another balance to the flavor profile, matches up nicely with the bacon, matches nicely with the beer, as well as the dill, and then obviously it's going to kind of slide into the background of our pine. So Raina, that bacon is looking pretty rendered down. There's some good color, some good fat, so you can go ahead, add those into the mussels right on top. And then the next thing I'm going to get you to do is put the pan back on the heat and add 1 of our cans of local craft beer. Today we're using Lone Oak Brewery Pilsner, also a sponsor for the 2023 Canada Games upcoming here in the province. It's a very, manipulatable recipe as far as some of the ingredients you can use. We could use a variety of local craft beer. This Pilsner is a nice kind of mild flavor profile, so it's going to accentuate, but it's not going to overpower and become the leading flavor. If we use, say, maybe a double IPA or something that's a little bit more pungent and a little bit more flavor forward. So now that we have the mussels on the stove, the last thing we have to do is add our island pine. So I took the liberty of pre-picking some of our ingredient that's going to finish our first mussel recipe today. And the one thing you have to be a little bit careful about when utilizing this ingredient is understanding how to harvest it and then how to utilize it. So today we're going to just sort of talk about how we're using this item. So the key anytime you're foraging in a lot of senses, no matter the product, is you're always looking for new or young growth, right? And that's no different with this product. So as you can see here, I have kind of a more mature pine branch that's a little bit more rigid on the base and the stem, good, solid, thick growth throughout all the leaves. This could be utilized, but it's going to be very, very pungent, and it's going to be quite woody as well. So I'm actually looking for something that's a little bit more wispy. As you can see in comparison, they almost look like the needles are flat as opposed to rounded, and that has to do with the maturity level of the needles themselves. So no different than when we're out looking for spruce tips in the spring. You're looking for that young growth present, and often that is going to be found on the hedgerows and the perimeters of large growth forest, okay? So once I have, my small young growth of pine, I'm simply from the base going to remove the individual little florets, and then I'm simply just going to pick the needles off, okay? And we want to make sure that we're picking the needles off because the base of the stem can be woody and can lack flavor. So all that's going to happen is it's going to deaden the actual flavor profile of the product that you're using. If we were making a stock, let's say for example, or we're doing a roast, something longer term, maybe a braise, where we actually wanted to have some of that more pungency involved, then we're probably going to take a whole branch off like this, very much as you would with rosemary or thyme or any other hard herb, and throw that directly in our pot of mussels. So because we are looking for the island pine to take a little bit of a lead, we're going to actually do both today. So we're going to add some of the pre-dried pine needles that I harvested from my property in eastern Prince Edward Island. Picked them this morning, and then earlier today gave them a harvest so they're actually fresh. The other option with island pine is you can actually dry it just like you would rosemary, just like you would thyme. But again, the key is finding that young growth and then understanding as you dry those pine needles, it's actually going to intensify in flavor. So you're going to have to adjust the recipe or adjust the amount by volume of this product that you're using. So now that we are seeing some nice buildup of moisture in our pot, we're going to add our pine. So we're going to do a little bit of both this morning, as I said. We're going to add some of our pine needles right into the top. That's going to add a nice flavor profile to our mussels. As well, we are going to add a few of our young stems in just to ensure that that island pine flavor profile is taking the lead, and all the other accentuating flavors that we have in this recipe, the lone oak pilsner, the dill, the maple, the bacon, the ginger, they're all going to be accentuation flavor profiles, and they're going to kind of fade into the background slightly. So as we have our first recipe featuring island pine boiling away there, I'm going to get Chef Raina to keep an eye on that. And we're actually going to slide over here to my left, and we're going to create our second recipe using this local ingredient that's very, very readily available here in the province. So this recipe actually takes a little bit of roots in the area of French cuisine, and it almost is going to look like a chowder in its starting. So again, a lot of these recipes and the theme for these festive recipes and flavor profiles that we are building is that they're meant to almost be manipulated once you understand the ingredients you're using, once you understand the technique. So again, this is going to look kind of similar into the starting stages maybe of a traditional seafood chowder, but then again toward the end we're just going to impart that flavor profile of island pine, our featured ingredient today, to kind of stand in the forefront with those other ingredients that are so often used in this classical recipe. So what I'm going to start with very simply is some butter, and I'm going to allow that to melt away in my pan. I'm going to take some aromatics, some simple fresh garlic. I'm just going to give that a quick rough chop. Again, if we were using this ingredient in a recipe where you wanted to make sure that it was evenly dispersed, then you'll want to keep and treat with the ingredient with a little bit more care than I'm going to. But again, since we're only using this in a recipe and we're almost flavoring a broth with it, more so than trying to ensure that every mussel individually has an even amount of garlic dispersed amongst them, we can kind of leave them a little bit chunkier and whole, and that's going to help draw out more flavor. So as I chop my ginger as well, these are going to be sweated off within our butter that I have melting away in our pan. So this is kind of the first steps and stages. As I had mentioned in our first recipe, we use powdered ginger. This is a fresh variety, and this is going to help build some of the aromatic flavor profile of the second recipe of our mussels featuring island pine. Okay? So then I'm simply going to add my aromatics to my butter and give that a little bit of time to saute. So it's not going to need a lot of time, and I actually could add all these ingredients directly into my pot, but this is just going to assist in imparting this flavor and flavor profile quicker. If I give the aromatics a quick steep in the butter, essentially with this recipe, I'm almost going to create the sauce in my pan 100% before I add it to the mussels and give them a steam. So as I have my aromatics boiling away, you can start to see that they're turning slightly translucent. Once there's the garlic and the ginger starts to have that almost appearance that it's soft, it could be crushed with a fork, I'm simply going to add some root vegetables. So again, this recipe takes roots in that traditional French chowder. So in a chowder, you're going to often see a mirepoix of carrots, onion, and celery. Today, we're just going to see a little deviation, keeping with the theme and keeping with sort of our December flavor profile. We're actually going to use equal parts carrots and equal parts parsnips and add those in to our garlic and ginger that's being sweated off. So once we have a nice even coating over our vegetables, you can smell that ginger and garlic, that flavor profile is starting to kind of fill the air, really delicate as far as the initial profile goes, but as we caramelize this garlic, it's going to almost bring out a subtle sweetness that's naturally present in these vegetables, and that's actually the reason why we're using parsnips in this recipe, is to play on that subtle sweetness from the caramelization of our aromatics as well as our root vegetables. So we have these boiling away quite nicely. This is the stage I am going to add some of our pine needles. And as I'm adding them in, very much like I did with my dill, I'm almost giving them a break up with my fingers or a little bit of a crush, and that's to bring some of their natural oil to the surface. As we continue to cook, you can see how almost a acidic flavor profile in the air, in that aroma, has started to come and naturally match that profile of the natural sweetness that we touched on here moments ago. Just want to add a touch more of our pine. Now you're seeing all our aromatics are just beginning to caramelize. Our carrots and parsnips, our root vegetables are just al dente. So I'm simply going to deglaze with a little bit of cream. Again, this recipe very much has roots in a French or Acadian-based chowder. Once I bring this liquid to a boil, then I'm going to add it into our second pot of mussels. Then we're going to add just a touch more of our pine on top, just so that it can steam and naturally steep during the cooking process. So I am going to get my mussel pot ready. The only other thing I'm going to add in here, besides what's in my pan, is some coriander seed. Again, I could add the coriander right to the cream, but as I steep it, it's actually going to lessen the flavor of this ground herb. So I want to keep that pungency present that you would get if you were to add, say, fresh cilantro to something. As we know, coriander is the seed of the cilantro plant. So I'm going to add this dried herb directly into the mussels so that that flavor profile of the coriander seed is going to stand a little more to the forefront than would be the case if I were to add it directly into the fatty cream. So as I add my coriander, set it off to the side. It's going to give a small stir to my broth. All right, so we are ready to go. Good bit of pine flavor. And then, as I said, we're going to pour that right over the top. Thank you. And then as we get the pot on the stove, the next thing we are going to do is add some more of our aromatics right in. So, again, as I talked about earlier, the key to utilizing this ingredient is using some of the young growth. So even in this larger piece that I had talked about earlier, you know, nice full branches to the top, if I was to flip it around to the bottom, toward the inside edge of the branch itself, there's actually some younger growth still present. Again, it's more understanding the ingredient and how you can utilize it than saying that, oh, I only have old growth in my house or that I can get it, it's never going to work. Most branches have some new growth at it if you understand where to look. So often at the base of a branch, if you have a nice mature tree, is where you're going to find some of these stems. So I'm going to pick off these branches. As I said in the other recipe, I'm going to actually pick off some whole branches to throw right in on top like so. And then some of the wispier, flatter, new growth, I'm going to take and just pick off the arils very delicately like so. Take some of my pre-picked stuff that I had earlier for recipe number 1. Sprinkle that in on top. High heat, we are ready to steam recipe number 2. So Raina, how is our first pot of mussels coming along? It's starting to open, so let's just go in. This is key, and one thing that a lot of people don't utilize or do at home is you got to make sure if we're using a tall cylindrical pot like we are in this, that we give them a nice stir to ensure that the mussels that are getting the first part of the heat source at the bottom are evenly dispersed so we don't have improper cooking. So we have 2 recipes here today that are very, as I said, some may look upon these recipes as kind of being a little bit new school, a little modern, but the reality of these roots, this is something that pioneers and settlers have done in this province for many years, is taking some of the ingredients that sort of are naturally present and utilizing those in such a way to get them through harsher times of year, such as the case as we get into the winter season. So both of these recipes, as I mentioned today, very base level ingredients. The hope is that we're using things that can be actually found in your home your home pantry. Your refrigerator can simply be found at your store locally, whether that be the market, the grocery store, and then understanding the flavor profiles and how to treat these ingredients are the most important when utilizing these recipes in your home kitchen. Once you understand how to treat these ingredients, once you understand why they're reacting a certain way, that's when you can start to add your own spin, add your own flavor profile. So that concludes our recipe demo for today. Those of you that are out in the audience that are interested, momentarily we will start serving up some lovely mussels here from Canada's Food Island, featuring our wild ingredient island pine today, and kind of get the sense of why it's important to reconnect to our roots when it comes to cuisine and comes to food products here on Prince Edward Island. So I want to give a quick thank you again to the crew at Founders Food Hall for allowing us to come in for the space today, Canada's Food Island for putting on this demo, allowing us to discuss island shellfish and PEI products. And then for those folks that are in the audience that joined us for the demo as well, thank you very much. It always makes it, a community feeling in this building when you get together and utilize this kitchen, and seeing so many familiar faces and seeing so many people in the crowd that are kind of, gearing up for the holiday season and joining us for this celebration of PEI ingredients. It's really humbling to see. So I want to say thank you once again to everybody. Hope you have a good afternoon and happy holidays.